by no means the only national leader to see himself in Lincolnian terms. The British Prime Minister during the First World War and its aftermath prized the 16th President as a model of civilian strong leadership, dealing with troublesome generals and politicians, mastering military strategy, pursuing unconditional surrender in the supreme crisis of the nation, and finally, in victory, working for clemency and reconciliation. Many emphasized Lincoln's genealogical roots in Britain, in rural Norfolk. He belongs to the race as a man of pure English blood, claimed James Bryce in 1918. But his English admirers constitute only one of many sets of claimants around the world. Here in Wales, he was called our Welsh president, descended from medieval princes. In fact, that it was Jefferson Davis who had some Welsh blood coursing through his Confederate veins was conveniently ignored. Germans, finding a link hole amongst his ancestors, convinced that German immigrants had played an essential role in securing the Republican Party's victory in 1860, made him one of them. Frederick Ebert, the first president of the Weimar Republic, became in death the Abraham Lincoln of German history. Latin Americans claimed Lincoln as a great Americanista, who identified with the broad transnational interests of the region's modernizers, and sternly opposed the narrow self-interest of the United States expansionists. French Freemasons claimed him as one of them, one who could handle the hammer, the square, and the compass, the living insignia of our immortal society, and saw in Lincoln's life story a progression through the degrees of Masonry. Such disparate appropriations reflect the extraordinarily adaptable dimensions of Lincoln's thought and how taking on Lincoln's mantle was seen to confer political power. Lincoln's impact on the world beyond his nation's borders would never again quite enjoy the range and force that it achieved during the half-century after his death. Yet his versatility as a cultural symbol and point of ideological reference during the rest of the American century meant that he continued to be appropriated and would enjoy a new salience during the Second World War and the subsequent era of anti-colonialism and Cold War hostilities. During the 1940s, the British political class turned once more to his words, particularly the Gettysburg Address, to give Anglo-American expression to the fight for democracy and humanity. In Germany, too, during the post-Second World War era, West Berliners linked their cause to a narrative of United States history that deployed Lincoln as a symbol of anti-communism and self-determination. Truths which Lincoln spoke in his House Divided speech of 1858, West Berlin Mayor Willy Brandt declared a century later. This was the speech, of course, the House Divided speech in which Lincoln used the Christian gospel to assert that a union divided between slave and free could not permanently stand. The truths which Lincoln spoke, said Brandt, are perhaps even more applicable to the present situation of the German people than to the one which he faced. Lincoln also came to be deployed in parts of the world where he had once been a less familiar presence. In the new birth of freedom that followed the fall of the Axis powers, the anti-colonialist movements to establish independent countries in Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean appropriated Lincoln as both an exemplar of freedom and as a national unifier. The ambiguities in the real Lincoln's historical actions as both liberator and consolidator allowed his deployment in these incongruent ways. Ghanaians were able to use him to legitimate liberation, but the nation's first ruler, Kwame Nkrumah, would read Lincoln's text on national unity to legitimate the massive force that the new state used to defeat its internal enemies. Plotting Lincoln's reception around the globe remains a work in progress. He merits significantly more case studies than I and my collaborators on the Global Lincoln Project have ventured. The Swiss Confederation, a federal state established in 1848 and inspired by the constitutional example of the United States, witnessed an extraordinary outpouring of tributes to the assassinated president in 1865 and 6. Lincoln and the union he represented clearly spoke to the condition of those Swiss unifiers and self-styled modernizers who had triumphed in the brief civil war against secessionist cantons in 1847. But the particular political and cultural nerve that Lincoln struck and the duration of his influence remain an untold story. When Norwegians gathered around Lincoln's statue in Oslo every July the 4th during the Nazi occupation, on what collective understanding were they drawing? Why is there a Lincoln Foundation in Albania? I don't know the answer to that. How typical of the South Seas more generally is the Hawaiian reference to Lincoln? What explains the continuing Korean appetite for his life story? And how might the apparent Soviet embrace of Lincoln be reconciled with its Cold War anti-Americanism? Lincoln's multiple ideological roles, political identities, and cultural meanings at home and abroad in the years since his death, however, can be seriously misleading. They suggest such an ambiguity in the man himself that we can't pin down the real or the authentic Lincoln. But surely we can. There may be some aspects of the inner life of Lincoln that we'll never wholly fathom, such as his religious beliefs and some of his personal relationships, especially with his wife Mary. But at the core of his political faith and practice are elements that are clearly identifiable and essentially unambiguous. To set these out at any length requires another lecture, so let me briefly summarize them here. First, Lincoln had a clear, essentially unchanging social and economic project for his country. His aim was to build an enterprising, commercially prosperous society in which, under the equal operation of Republican laws, all citizens would enjoy the right to rise. His ideas drew on his personal experience as a self-made man, rising from rural poverty in Kentucky and Indiana. And his logic indicated and dictated a social order at odds with Southern slavery. He insisted that all men, black and white, should be free to enjoy the fruits of their own labor. Free labor offered the prospect of improvement in condition and kept the social order fluid. Slavery stifled enterprise in both planters and slaves and sustained a fundamental inequality depriving human beings of the just rewards of their labor. Secondly, Lincoln's commitment to the integrity of the American Union was founded on his unshakable respect for the political keystones of the Republic, the Declaration of Independence and the Federal Constitution. One, the celebratory of equality, the other, the guarantor of freedom. His deep attachment to popular democratic government was based on a secure faith in the rationality and the good sense of the majority of the people themselves. Lincoln would not have subscribed to the view of H.L. Mencken, which I'm sure you're familiar with, that, as Mencken put it, no one ever lost money by underestimating the intelligence of the American people. Lincoln made no reservation, no mental reservation, when at Gettysburg he celebrated the government of the people, by the people, for the people. And those who heard that speech recall that he stressed the word people. As he told New Yorkers on his journey to Washington as president-elect, there is nothing that can ever bring me willingly to consent to the destruction of this union unless it were to be that thing for which the union itself was made. I understood a ship to be made for the carrying of a cargo, preservation of a cargo. And so long as the ship can be saved with the cargo, it should never be abandoned. So long then as it is possible that the prosperity and the liberties of the people can be preserved in the union, it shall be my purpose at all times to preserve it. And during the war, Lincoln came to see that the preservation of the Union, preservation of the cargo, the Union legitimated the emancipation of the slaves. Thirdly, Lincoln's vision of the Union drew both on a calculation of practicalities as well as on a romantic, even religious feeling allied to a sense of the nation's providential role, of Americans being, as he expressed it in February of 1861, of Americans being the Almighty's almost chosen people. Like a typical American of his time, Lincoln gave the American Union a special role in world history. Most governments have been based practically on the denial of the equal rights of man. Ours began by affirming those rights. They said some men are too ignorant and vicious to share in government. We proposed to give all a chance, and we expected the weak to grow stronger, and the ignorant wiser, and all better and happier together. Speaking of liberty to all,